Hello and welcome to Newslick. The American Federal Communications Commission has this week announced that it would reclassify broadband services to permit regulation of ISPs as public utilities. This means that the FCC will have the power to ensure, for instance, that the principle of network neutrality can be protected online. At the same time, in India, we've seen that Facebook has recently launched its Internetorg application, which provides users free access to an array of basic applications. To discuss the FCC's steps and what this could mean for India, we're joined by Prabir Purkayastha, Chairperson of the Society for Knowledge Commons. Hi Prabir and welcome to Newslick. Now, what is network neutrality and why is this principle so important?
Well, network neutrality follows from what is to be called the common carriage principle, which means that if you offer a certain services on a platform, that platform has not to discriminate between the various services. It cannot deny services, applications that are there on top of it. It cannot be discriminatory and it cannot charge unreasonable prices. And this is the principle, for instance, if you offer the ferry service, you want a road service, and also the principle which was followed in telecom, that if you provide a certain kind of services, if you are providing the basic carriage, as it were, the transmission system, then you cannot discriminate between any kind of services. You have to provide services to all. You can charge more, for instance, if it is taking more costs. For instance, railways charge more for handling hazardous chemicals because there's a handling cost involved. But it cannot be unreasonable, it cannot be discriminatory. That's the principle.
So why has there been so much talk of this principle of network neutrality, specifically in the context of the internet, and what is the importance of this reclassification that the FCC has just recently done?
Well, let's look at it this way. Internet is an application which runs on either cable television networks, which is the basic cable network that's provided to each house if it comes through a cable, or telephones, which is what's called the DSLs. Basically, it uses the old telephone wires for providing the same broadband. This is what the broadband service is all about. So you can get broadband, which is not the dial-up service that you earlier used to have. You can get broadband services, and different countries have again classified them according to what is the minimum bandwidth you have to provide for it to be classified as a broadband service. But in principle, it means that you offer a certain kind of telecommunication services, in this case broadband services, over either telephone wires or over the cable that comes to your house for cable TV. This is basically what the internet is supposed to be riding on top of. So internet in this sense is a set of applications. You can have Facebook, that's an application on the internet. You can have Google as an application. So you have an array of applications that run on top of this telecommunication network that comes to your house. So historically, network neutrality would not have been an issue because it was classified under telecom even in the United States originally.
Telephony was classified.
Telephony was classified, and DSL, which was using the same copper wire that came to the house for voice telephone, was also classified as basically a broadband service under what is called Title II, which means it's a regulated service, is a public utility, what you said. It is only when the cable television companies started offering broadband services that the issue came up that cable television was not under telecom regulation of this kind. So should they also be brought in, or would the internet services which they were offering, broadband, would also be brought in under the same condition DSL, or they would be classified differently? So they got classified differently, and that is what they got classified finally as what's called information services. And in fact, the DSL was removed from the Title II, which is the classification as a public utility, as it were. This was then transferred also under information services, and therefore it came out of the kind of regulation that net neutrality would demand.
So what specifically is the kind of regulation that the FCC wants to impose in this internet space? I mean, we've already seen last year, for instance, that their open internet rules were struck down by a court saying that it didn't have the power to regulate in this way. So this is clearly a response to that previous action. So what specifically do they want to do?
Essentially, if they want to regulate broadband services, then they have to put it under Title II. That's very clear. That if you don't put it under Title II, you cannot then regulate it. FCC was trying to leave it not under Title II, but under Title I, and then trying to regulate it. The court struck it down, and honestly everybody said the much easier way would be to classify it as essentially a telecom service. Now the historical reason why the US wanted to make this distinction, because throughout the world it has been arguing internet is different from telecommunications, and therefore if United States itself agrees that telecommunication is equivalent to internet, or internet services ride on basic telecom services, then the whole argument which they, for instance, advanced during the wicket in Dubai when this ITU treaty was being done, all of this then falls flat. So there was this hesitation of classifying it as telecom services, but now the fact that net neutrality is such a popular issue, President Obama has supported it. With all this, it's very difficult for FCC to stand up to this and take the next step, which is declare net neutrality. And the only way they could really do it legally was to do it under Title II.
So how, I mean, do we in India here deal with our service providers? Do we treat them as public utility providers? And a consequent question, what are we doing about network neutrality in India?
You see, the voice services are clearly regulated services. In India, internet services are also regulated services under the Telecommunication Act. What is the difference is that the Telecom Regulatory Authority has treated internet services with forbearance, which means it has the power to regulate, but it is not regulating it. So therefore also its argument, which Mr. Khullar has given, that there is no law regarding net neutrality in India. The issue is not there should be a law or not. The issue is the law demands that you treat competition in a particular way. It says you can regulate the internet, so it very clearly gives the powers to TRAI and the Telecom Authority here, the Government of India, to regulate the internet the way it is supposed to be. Under that regulation, net neutrality is one of the important considerations. And yes, the fact that it has not been regulated does not mean the TRAI does not have the powers to regulate it. It has the powers, it can declare various things in it, including network neutrality, just as the way for voice services it declares the rates as well as it declares the service obligations. So all of this can be done for internet as well. In India, we don't need a certain kind of issues that the United States had to face, because we have not separated internet services as information services. We have left it as a telecom services.
Now, it's often claimed that regulating the business of ISPs would cut into their profits and consequently their ability to invest in infrastructure and so on. Now, given in India you have high spectrum costs as well as supposedly high costs of business in India, do you believe that the sector is best left untouched, as you said, forbearance? Is that the best way to deal with this online sector?
The argument for forbearance is the costs are not too high, so it's okay. The question that arises is Indian broadband costs are one of the highest in the world. So we are way above for the kind of bandwidth we are getting. We are actually paying far more. So there is a very strong argument why forbearance is actually failing. On top of that, what the telecom companies are doing in conjunction with certain strong internet companies is to bundle services and take money from both. Take money from us as the consumers, high bandwidth costs, as well as also charge the internet service providers.
Or content provider.
Content providers, but content through certain applications like Facebook and so on. YouTube, Facebook, Skype, these are the key applications that we are talking about, and charge them extra money for being able to give them services. This is in fact the Internetorg issue that has come up earlier. Vodafone and Airtel were talking about it, that they will introduce services which will then bundle only a few things. Already in the mobile area, this practice is already there. So these are all violations of net neutrality of various forms, because it basically says a few players will then be the dominant players because they are the only ones which will be available cheaply as virtually at no cost, while all others will be denied access because they will have then, the consumer then will have to pay higher costs.
Now, we've seen, of course, as I mentioned, the launch of Internetorg here in India recently. But don't you think that in a country like India, where access continues to be such a big problem for a large part of our population, that initiatives like this should actually be encouraged, despite the fact that they might limit the user in terms of the content that the person can access?
You see, there are two sets of problems with this. One is the larger issue that all these players, how do they make their business model? Their business model comes from actually offering the user as to the advertisers as a product. Now, effectively what it means is that the advertising revenue, which is the mainstay of media in the country, would then shift to Google, Facebook and a few other players on the internet. So over a period of time, what it would do is it will really skew completely the media incomes into these channels, and increasingly it's very clear internet is going to become the dominant pipe through which media in future is going to come, whether it's newspapers, whether it is television, even whether it's radio. So this is the one part of it. The second part of it, we are never going to have Indian companies on the net if you allow a monopoly of this time to develop. So what it does is all the startups which had the ability to develop, and that is how the Facebooks of the world have developed, these then cannot develop in the future. So what you're going to do is to freeze monopoly virtually forever, or at least for a long time on the net, to the detriment of Indian companies who are latecomers on the scene.
So this is clearly an issue that various authorities in India could deal with, whether it's the Competition Commission or the Telecom Regulatory Authority. So that's all the time we have today. Thanks, Prabir, for being with us, and thank you for watching.